Racist staff mocked and laughed at the black delivery man, unaware that he's the real owner. Where are you watching our videos from? Drop your location in the comment. Let's begin. The hum of traffic faded as Michael Carter parked his weathered delivery van in front of the gleaming facade of his flagship restaurant, Solace. Dressed in a simple hoodie and worn jeans, he looked nothing like the multi-millionaire entrepreneur he was. Michael adjusted the strap of the insulated delivery bag slung over his shoulder and took a steadying breath. This was no ordinary visit. It was a test. He wanted to see firsthand how his staff behaved when they thought no one was watching. The restaurant's glass doors glinted in the late afternoon sunlight. Inside, the polished marble floors and chandeliers painted a picture of elegance, but as Michael stepped in, he felt an immediate shift. A group of servers near the entrance turned their heads, their eyes narrowing as they whispered. Though their words were inaudible, the dismissive smirks said enough. Michael walked to the reception desk, his posture relaxed, but his sharp eyes taking everything in. At the desk stood Linda, the manager, with her arms crossed and her lips pursed into a thin line of irritation. Her neatly pressed blazer and clipped tone radiated authority, but her expression darkened as she spotted him. "You're late," she snapped without preamble, gesturing toward the delivery bag. "We don't tolerate laziness here. Put it in the kitchen and leave. Quickly." Michael stayed silent, meeting her gaze with calm composure. Linda's brow furrowed, mistaking his silence for insolence. "Are you deaf? Do I need to call someone to help you understand instructions?" A ripple of laughter broke out from a group of nearby staff. "Wrong place for him, huh?" One server muttered loud enough to be heard. Another chuckled. "Yeah, he must have gotten lost on his way to the drive-thru." Their words stung, not because they were unexpected, but because they felt so casually delivered in the space he had envisioned as a haven of respect and inclusivity. Linda's voice rose. "We don't have all day for this nonsense. Do your job or get out." She tapped her manicured nails impatiently on the desk, drawing even more attention from other employees and a few curious diners. Michael, still holding the delivery bag, let his gaze sweep across the room. He noted a bartender scrolling through their phone instead of serving drinks. A waiter rolled his eyes at an elderly couple struggling to get his attention. A plate of food sat untouched on the pass, growing cold as another server chatted idly nearby. Michael's lips pressed into a thin line. This wasn't the Solace he had envisioned. The warmth and professionalism he expected were absent, replaced by indifference and thinly veiled arrogance. His heart tightened as he thought of the hard work it had taken to build this dream from nothing. Linda, mistaking his silence for submission, smirked. "If you're not going to move, I'll have to call security. We can't have people like you hanging around." Michael's grip tightened on the bag strap, but his expression remained calm. "People like me?" he asked softly, his tone even. Linda's smirk widened, emboldened by what she assumed was his meekness. "Yeah, people like you. Out of place, wasting everyone's time. We run a professional establishment. And frankly, we don't need distractions." More laughter bubbled up from the staff, and the sound cut through Michael like a blade. He thought of his late mother, who had taught him the value of kindness and dignity, and how she would have been devastated to see such behavior in a place he had built. Linda leaned forward, her voice dropping to a patronizing tone. "Why don't you leave the bag and go? You've done enough for the day." Just then, the front doors swung open, and a well-dressed woman stepped inside. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, and her perfectly tailored suit exuded sophistication. She froze mid-step when her eyes landed on Michael. Her expression turned from confusion to horror. "Sir," she exclaimed, her voice carrying through the room. "What are you doing here like this?" The room fell into a stunned silence. Linda's smirk vanished, replaced by a puzzled frown. The laughter from the staff abruptly ceased, leaving only the muffled hum of the restaurant's ambient music. The woman hurried toward Michael, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Sir, is everything all right?" she asked, her tone filled with respect. Michael's eyes flicked to Linda, whose confusion was quickly turning into dread. He adjusted the delivery bag on his shoulder and finally spoke, his voice steady but firm. "I think we need to have a conversation about how things are run around here." Linda's face paled, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to process the situation. The staff exchanged nervous glances, the weight of realization beginning to settle over them. The energy in the room shifted, the arrogance and mockery replaced by an uneasy tension. Michael took a step forward, his commanding presence now unmistakable. "I've seen enough for one day," he said, his voice low but resolute. "Now let's talk about what happens next." The stunned silence deepened as Linda, frozen in place, tried to find the words to save herself. But Michael had already turned toward the dining area, leaving a trail of suspense and fear in his wake. Michael stood in the center of the room, his calm gaze sweeping across the now silent staff. The well-dressed woman beside him adjusted her blazer, then spoke with authority. "Everyone, listen carefully. This is Mr. Carter, the owner of this restaurant chain." Gasps rippled through the room. Linda's smirk evaporated, replaced by a look of pure shock. "The owner," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. She took a step back, her usual confidence crumbling. Around her, the servers exchanged wide-eyed glances, trying to process what they'd just heard. "Yes, the owner," the assistant continued. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the heavy silence. "And he's been watching everything." Linda's face turned ashen. "Mr. Carter, I didn't realize." Michael raised a hand, cutting her off. "Enough," he said, his voice calm but firm. The single word held an undeniable authority, silencing any attempts at explanation. His demeanor had shifted. Gone was the unassuming delivery man they'd ridiculed. In his place stood a man who was undeniably in control. Michael let the silence stretch for a moment before speaking again. "I came here today to see how my restaurant is being run when no one thinks I'm watching. What I've seen is disappointing, to say the least." Linda swallowed hard, her arrogance replaced by visible fear. "Sir, if I may explain." "I'll get to you in a moment," Michael interrupted, his voice icy. He turned to the rest of the staff, his piercing gaze sweeping the room. "Is this how you treat people who walk through these doors, with mockery and disrespect? Do you laugh at every delivery driver or assume every person who doesn't look wealthy doesn't belong?" The weight of his words settled over the room. No one dared to answer. The servers shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Even the bartender, who had been scrolling on his phone earlier, now stood frozen, his face pale. Michael's assistant handed him a small notebook, and he opened it, flipping through the pages as he spoke. "While you were busy laughing, I was observing. And what I saw was a staff that's forgotten what professionalism means." He glanced up, locking eyes with the bartender. "You," he said, his tone cutting, "were too busy on your phone to notice customers waiting at the bar." The bartender opened his mouth to protest, but quickly thought better of it. Michael moved on, pointing to a server who had laughed the loudest earlier. "And you, ignoring the couple at table 5 when they clearly needed assistance. Is that the kind of service we're known for?" The server's face turned red as he stared at the floor. Finally, Michael's gaze landed on Linda. "And you," he said, his voice dropping a notch. "You're supposed to be the manager, the one setting the standard. Instead, you've created an environment where it's acceptable to belittle and mock people you think are beneath you." Linda's lips trembled as she tried to respond. "Sir, I had no idea who you were. If I'd known." Michael cut her off again. "That's the problem, Linda. You shouldn't need to know someone's title or wealth to treat them with basic decency." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Michael exhaled deeply, his calm exterior masking the storm of emotions beneath. He couldn't help but think back to where he had come from. Growing up in a struggling neighborhood, he had faced this kind of treatment all his life. Teachers, employers, even strangers had looked down on him, assuming his worth based on the color of his skin or the clothes he wore. He thought of his late mother, who had worked tirelessly to provide for him, always reminding him to rise above the ignorance of others. Her words echoed in his mind. Respect isn't given, son. It's earned. But don't let anyone tell you you're less than you are. That memory had fueled his drive to succeed, to build something that would stand as a testament to his determination and vision. And yet here he was, witnessing the same prejudice he had worked so hard to overcome, thriving within his own establishment. Shaking off the memory, Michael focused on Linda, who was now fidgeting nervously. "I gave you this job because your resume said you were a leader," he said, his voice measured. "But what kind of leader mocks someone they think is beneath them?" Linda opened her mouth to respond but faltered. Finally, she managed. "It was a misunderstanding, Mr. Carter. I've always worked hard for this restaurant." Michael's piercing gaze silenced her. "And yet, your hard work didn't stop you from treating me, a supposed delivery driver, like trash. If I didn't look like the owner, what made you feel entitled to push me out the door?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Michael's expression softened, but his voice remained firm. "Here's the thing, Linda. Respect isn't about titles or appearances. It's about how you treat people when you think no one is watching." Linda's shoulders slumped, her excuses drying up. The staff around her looked equally uneasy, realizing the gravity of their actions. Michael closed his notebook and took a step back, letting his words sink in. "This ends today," he said, his tone final. "We're cleaning house. If you can't meet the standards I set for this restaurant, respect, professionalism, and inclusivity, you won't work here. Period." Linda's face turned ashen. "Sir, please." Michael raised a hand again, silencing her. "There's no need to plead your case right now. We'll have a full meeting where everyone will have the chance to explain themselves. Until then, I suggest you think very carefully about how you've been conducting yourself." He turned to his assistant. "Schedule a staff meeting for tonight, after closing." "Of course, sir," she replied, her voice brisk and professional. Michael faced the staff one last time, his gaze steady. "I built this restaurant to be a place of respect and excellence. If you can't embody that, you don't belong here." With that, he turned and walked toward the dining room, leaving the staff to stand in stunned silence. Behind him, Linda's panicked expression spoke volumes, but Michael didn't look back. He had seen enough. The reckoning had only just begun. The restaurant's lights dimmed, leaving only a soft glow illuminating the dining area. Chairs scraped against the floor as the staff assembled, faces tense and uncertain. The hum of conversation died quickly when Michael entered, his presence commanding silence. He walked to the center of the room and paused, letting the tension settle. The only sound was the faint clinking of glassware as someone shifted nervously. Michael's voice broke the silence, low and steady but filled with authority. "I built this place to be a symbol of excellence and respect. What I saw today was neither." His words hung heavy in the air. No one dared meet his eyes. The staff shifted uncomfortably, the weight of their actions pressing down on them. Michael's gaze swept across the room, pausing briefly on Linda, who sat stiffly, her jaw tight. "Let me tell you a story," Michael began, his tone calm but laced with an undercurrent of steel. "When I was a kid, I had a teacher who looked me in the eye and told me I'd never amount to anything. She didn't say it outright, but I knew what she meant. I didn't fit her picture of success." The room remained silent, his words cutting through the unease. "But I worked. I worked harder than anyone expected. And when I built this restaurant, I swore it would be a place where people were treated with dignity, customers and staff alike. Today, I saw that vision tarnished." Michael's piercing gaze landed on Linda. "Let's start with you." Linda visibly flinched, her fingers gripping the armrests of her chair. "Sir," she started, her voice shaky, "if I'd known who you were, I would have." "That's the problem, isn't it?" Michael interrupted, his voice calm but sharp. You shouldn't need to know someone's title or wealth to treat them with basic respect. Linda's face flushed, and she opened her mouth to respond, but Michael raised a hand. Explain yourself. Linda hesitated, then launched into a stammering defense. I've always worked hard here. I've kept the staff in line, made sure everything ran smoothly. I never meant to offend anyone. It was just a misunderstanding. Before Michael could respond, a voice from the back cut through the room. That's not true. All heads turned to see a waitress named Carla, her face set with determination. Linda's been treating people like this for months. She picks favorites, ignores complaints, and talks down to anyone she doesn't like. Another staff member, a dishwasher named Raul, nodded. She calls us lazy behind our backs. She even made a joke about firing me last week because I looked too slow. Linda's face turned ashen as more staff began chiming in. One by one, they shared stories of her toxic leadership, how she belittled lower-ranking employees, ignored customer complaints, and created an environment of fear. Michael listened intently, his expression unreadable. When the voices died down, he turned back to Linda. Anything to say? Linda stammered, her earlier confidence shattered. I didn't realize I thought I was doing what was best for the restaurant. Michael's gaze was unflinching. And mocking the supposed delivery driver was what's best for the restaurant. I didn't mean it like that. She protested, her voice rising in desperation. Enough, Michael said, his voice cutting through her excuses. You've created an environment where disrespect thrives. That ends now. He paused, letting his words sink in. You're terminated, effective immediately. A murmur of agreement rippled through the staff. Linda sat frozen, disbelief etched on her face. Slowly, she rose, casting a final desperate glance at Michael, but his expression remained firm. Without another word, she turned and walked out. The room was silent again, the tension heavy but different now. Less fear, more anticipation. Michael took a moment before addressing the staff. Let me be clear, this isn't just about Linda. This is about all of us. This restaurant represents me, and today, I didn't see a reflection I'm proud of. A small voice broke the silence. Sir. Michael turned to see Sam, a junior waiter, standing hesitantly. Sam was young, barely out of high school, and visibly nervous. I wanted to say something earlier. When Linda was mocking you, I knew it was wrong, but I was scared I'd lose my job if I spoke up. Michael studied Sam for a moment, his expression softening slightly. It takes courage to admit fear, he said, and it takes even more to act despite it. Sam swallowed hard, his hands clenching at his sides. I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner. Michael nodded. You're not the only one who's been afraid to speak up. But what matters now is that you're willing to change. He stepped forward, addressing the staff as a whole. From this moment on, this restaurant will be a place of respect, where everyone is treated with dignity, no matter their title, position, or background. But that starts with accountability. Michael turned back to Sam, his expression thoughtful. You showed more honesty and integrity today than I've seen from people twice your age. Starting tomorrow, you'll be training as an assistant manager. Sam's eyes widened in shock. Me? But I? You have what it takes, Michael interrupted, his tone firm. And I'll be here to help you prove it. The staff murmured, some nodding in approval. Sam blinked rapidly, clearly trying to process the sudden promotion. Thank you, sir, he managed, his voice thick with emotion. Michael took a deep breath, his gaze distant for a moment as a memory surfaced. He thought back to a pivotal moment in his youth, standing in a classroom as his teacher sneered, "People like you don't make it far." That moment had lit a fire in him, pushing him to defy every stereotype and expectation. He had promised himself he'd create opportunities for others who had been overlooked, just like him. Snapping back to the present, Michael looked around the room. I know change isn't easy, he said, his voice softer now. But it's necessary. This restaurant will be a place where respect isn't just expected, it's demanded. For everyone. He paused, letting his words settle. Tomorrow, we'll start fresh. But remember, respect isn't just something you give when someone's watching. It's who you are when no one is. The staff exchanged nervous glances, the weight of his words sinking in. Michael's expression hardened slightly. I'll be watching, and I won't tolerate any behavior that undermines what we're building here. As he turned to leave, he added one final declaration. This restaurant will be better, or it won't be mine. The staff remained seated, processing the whirlwind of events. Sam stood a little taller, a flicker of hope in his eyes, while the others looked uncertain but introspective. Change was coming, and none of them could ignore it. The hum of renewed energy filled the restaurant over the following weeks. Staff moved with purpose, their demeanors lighter and more professional. Michael's new policies had transformed the once toxic environment into a workplace where respect and accountability thrived. Anonymous feedback forms allowed employees to voice concerns without fear, and mandatory diversity training challenged biases head-on. Michael spent more time on site than ever, observing and guiding his team. Under his leadership, overlooked employees like Sam blossomed. Sam, now an assistant manager, tackled his new responsibilities with enthusiasm, earning the respect of his peers. Customers noticed the change too, praising the warm atmosphere and attentive service. For the first time in a while, Solace felt like the inclusive haven Michael had always envisioned. One evening, just as Michael was wrapping up a meeting in his office, there was a knock at the door. He opened it to find Linda standing there. She looked different. Her usually sharp features were softened by humility, and she held a folded letter in trembling hands. "Mr. Carter," she began hesitantly, "may I speak with you?" Michael studied her for a moment, then nodded and stepped aside to let her in. She sat across from him, her posture tense but her voice steady. "I've had a lot of time to think about what happened," she said, placing the letter on the desk. "I realize now how wrong I was." Her voice cracked slightly, but she pushed forward. "When I lost my job, it was a wake-up call. I had to confront parts of myself I didn't want to see, my biases, my arrogance. Losing everything forced me to understand the harm I caused." She slid the letter across the desk. "I wrote this to apologize. To you, to the staff, to everyone I disrespected." Michael picked up the letter but didn't open it. His expression was unreadable as he leaned back in his chair. "And now you're here. What are you hoping for, Linda?" Tears welled in her eyes, but she held his gaze. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to make amends. If there's any way I can prove I've changed, I'm willing to do the work." Michael remained silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming lightly on the desk. He thought about the damage Linda had caused, but also the courage it took to admit her faults. Forgiveness wasn't something he gave lightly, but he knew growth required opportunity. "You want a second chance," he said finally, his voice measured. "But redemption isn't about words. It's about actions." He leaned forward. "Here's what I'm willing to do. You'll attend a mandatory inclusion and leadership training program. You'll cover the costs yourself. And there's no guarantee of rehiring. If you complete it and prove you've changed, I'll consider giving you a fresh start. Not as a manager, but in a position where you can earn back trust." Linda's hands tightened in her lap. She hesitated, her pride warring with her determination. Finally, she nodded. "I'll do it. Thank you for giving me a chance." Michael gave her a slight nod. "Prove me right." As Linda left, Michael stood and walked to the dining room. The restaurant was quiet now, the last customers having departed for the evening. He paused in the shadows, watching as Sam spoke with a new hire, his tone patient and encouraging. "Kindness goes a long way," Sam was saying. "People remember how you make them feel. That's what Mr. Carter taught us." Michael smiled faintly, pride swelling in his chest. The transformation was happening, slowly but surely. His vision for Solace was becoming reality. The moment was interrupted by his assistant entering, holding an envelope. "This just came for you, sir." Michael took the envelope and returned to his office, curiosity flickering in his mind. Sitting at his desk, he opened the letter and unfolded the crisp paper. The handwriting was neat and deliberate, its tone polite but chilling. "Mr. Carter, I witnessed your actions that day, and I applaud your integrity and strength. It takes courage to confront injustice, especially when it's aimed at you. Your leadership inspires hope. But be careful. Even the strongest foundations can crumble under the weight of judgment. People watch and remember. Success attracts admiration, but it also invites scrutiny. Stay vigilant. Sincerely, a patron." Michael frowned, reading the letter again. He couldn't place the writer. There were no hints about their identity, and the words carried an ambiguous tone. Was it a warning, a veiled threat, or simply an observation? He folded the letter carefully and set it aside. Leaning back in his chair, outside the window, the city lights twinkled, a stark contrast to the shadows creeping into his thoughts. He had fought hard to build this empire, and the letter reminded him that the battle for respect and justice was ongoing. Michael stared out at the skyline, his resolve hardening. The restaurant had taken its first steps toward redemption, but the path ahead would require vigilance and unwavering dedication. He wasn't just building a business. He was challenging a system that thrived on prejudice and division. With a deep breath, Michael rose and turned off the lights. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but he was ready. This was his legacy, and he wouldn't let it crumble. Did you enjoy this story? What are your thoughts? Please drop it in the comment, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.